And before the break, we have the industry as a last representative in this group. There are no new advices, no good advices without the industry. It's a pleasure to have Frédérique Debroucker from Medtronic with us. I think one of the most experienced people in the industry, in the HTA and reimbursement scene, which she's heading for many years at Medtronic. Thanks for being with us. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to give you the industry perspective today. I'm happy to be in Berlin under the sun, to be honest. That's my second time in Berlin, and the first time it was snowing. So I'm very happy to be here today under the sun. And I hope I will have some nice dinner with my colleague tonight, to be honest. Just about the topic of today, I'm going to focus on high-risk medical devices that are supposed to go through GCA. Because if I talk about medical devices in general, I can talk from syringes to capital equipment to whatever, and the heterogeneity is complex and you cannot really focus. So the focus is innovative medical devices that are disruptive or transformative and might go through GCA. The other thing is that I give you a perspective that might change because I don't have the implementing act on GCA yet ready. So that's what we understand from the different guidelines, etc. If I can go to the next slide, this is a summary of what have been told previously, I think, about the specificity of medical devices and medical devices markets, which needs to be accounted for and which matters in terms of regulation and HTA frameworks. Several things, the unique characteristic, the rapid pace of innovation, the fact that we have a product with 2 to 3 year cycles, that we include artificial intelligence, digital stuff into our product, which are reshaping the landscape around our devices, the importance of the users, whether it's a patient or a clinician or a nurse or several users sometimes, I'll give an example, as well as the rapid competitive nature of our markets. We have rapid price decreases, low patent protection, and procurement and tendering, which are different in several markets. So I'd like to take one example, which is a little medical device here, and to explain you in the last 20 years how it evolved after more than 10 product iteration. It is an implantable loop recorder that records ECG, and at the beginning it was aimed at recording ECG for patients with syncope, unexplained syncope, okay, and it was about this size of my 2 fingers. Sorry, I have to show my fingers. So this size of my 2 fingers, a pretty buccal, pretty heavy device, implanted into a cath lab by a rhythmologist under the skin like that, and the patient was a user because he had with an external device to freeze the data after the syncope. So he or she had 20 minutes so that we can have what happened in terms of EKG and an explanation of a syncope. Okay? After 20 years, now this device is smaller than my little finger, and I have little fingers. Okay? It can be implanted into an examination room by a nurse. The patient has nothing to do because it's all recorded automatically. We do remote follow-up, we do remote programming, and we have artificial intelligence which is assessing the different episodes of EKG so that we also decrease the work for the team of HCP, because it's not only a physician, it's nurses who are looking at the result. And it's completely different devices after 20 years. Several LCTs, several open label trials, several real-world data. So we had a continuous assessment of this device, okay? And now it's not only diagnose unexplained syncope, but also unexplained stroke, where we want to know whether the patient is doing atrial fibrillation to give him or her the adequate drugs, so anticoagulation drugs. Not sure you say that in English. So that's a type of example of a high-risk medical device, which is disruptive at the beginning and continue to be along the way in 2 decades. Next slide, please. The other things that need to be taken into account is that for medical devices, in Western Europe, which is my scope, I'm taking care of Western Europe at Medtronic, the link between HTA and coverage, reimbursement, funding, hence definitive patient access, because if you don't have money for the hospital or the user to access the device, then you don't have access. Is far from clear. It's ambiguous. So you may have countries like France, and you see with my accent, I am French, so I know that. I've been working 20 years with the French SAS, where we have nearly a systematic clinical, comparative clinical assessment, and it's linked with a pricing negotiation and eventually a definitive reimbursement that we redo every 3 to 5 years because it's clinical devices. So you need to reassess continuously what you are doing, okay? From that, you can go to Spain, where in Spain, you may have national or regional HTA, but basically my colleague in Spain tell me nobody cares. You can do an HTA, but the region, the hospital do whatever they want. It has no, the recommendation can be positive, negative, neutral, we don't know, not enough data. Nobody really take care about this HTA, okay? So that's the situation for medical device with different stages. So my recommendation for us and for everybody in the room is that when you do HTA, it's very costly. It's resource intensive for HTA body, for the European Commission, who is doing this new, I think, wonderful regulation. I am a European my gut is European, okay? But it's a lot of work. It's resource intensive. So why, if we do that and we don't achieve the final patient access we want to achieve, meaning the patient really has access because the product is funded correctly and it's equitable around a given country or in Europe because any patient can have access. So that's the second thing I would like to share with you today. The third thing is about the HTA academic objective, which is comparative effectiveness versus standard of care. No other way of doing HTA, no problem with that. However, several things need to be taken into account. What we do is continuous assessment. It's the explanation of the implantable loop recorder I explained, and it has to be taken into account into this framework. The second thing is that in the case of the European HTA, we are trying to guess right now which of our products will have to go through a GCA, whether we need to do a GSC, and it's not easy. So it's a sort of guess and a risk assessment that we need to do with our headquarters. And the work that we do for the last 2 years, we do that once a year, and to see which type of devices could go through that. And then how do we do the clinical development plan of our product? First and foremost, a clinical development plan should be completely transparent and include studies which are following the highest scientific standards. So going back to what you said, no loss to follow-up patient, enough patient included, representativity, because otherwise your study is a waste of money and a waste of time for everybody. So that's, for me, the first thing which is important. The second thing is the timing of assessment and including the learning curve. Because my little device at the beginning, we needed to understand how it works. And the first study was an open label. It was not a randomized controlled trial. So we had to evolve at the beginning. So we need to ensure that the device is mature and stable enough. We need to ensure that the users knows how to use it, are trained. So the learning curve is more or less okay. We need to be able to extrapolate data from one device to another, because you may do your RCT on a device and the commercial one will be an upgrade because you change the software in it, for example, and you improve it. And last but not least, if the HTA duration is 2 to 3 years, then the product you will assess during the HTA won't be commercialized anymore. So that's also something which is important to take into account. The third thing is the organizational impact, which change the landscape. The little device I explained, we change the organization around the patient. He or she doesn't have to freeze the data. He or she doesn't have to go to the hospital every month to look at the episode because it's all remotely done. Followed up, we look at the episode and we can even reprogram remotely. So he doesn't have to come to the hospital except maybe once a year. So how do you assess that? It's complexify the intervention, but you need to assess that as well. So that's why I think PICOs are very important, but this is very important to develop them with physician, patient, and health tech technology developers. Really very important. Then we are talking about double-blind randomized controlled trials. The guidelines for European HTA is very strict and it's based on drug. So the gold standard is double-blind randomized trial. How can I do that with medical devices? I can do sham procedure. Is it ethical or not? It is a question. But for the hip, you won't do a sham procedure for the hip, okay? You can blind the outcome, which might make sense. You can blind the adjudication of an adverse event. So you have different things that you can blind, but doing a completely double-blind RCT is nearly not feasible. And then you can say, okay, but we want to do a complex randomized control trial, like cluster design, Zeller randomization. I'm not a methodologist, but there is a lot of creativity around that. What does that mean? That means that you will inflate the number of patients you need to include because it's very complex design. And it happened at Medtronic that we had a study on a very complex randomized trial like that was funded by the French government, and we never achieved the inclusion of patients that we needed at the end of the day because it was so complex, nor the surgeon nor the patient wanted to be included. So we also have to take that into account. And for me, what is really important is to find the good balance between what we want to assess, when we want to assess it, and how we want to have this internal validity, you know, this causality, and deal with uncertainty, and the external validity and what happened in real life. So one of the thinking we have at Medtronic, we are not sure of that yet, and I would like to have a discussion with you afterwards, is maybe as well when we do after a GCA, can we do coverage with evidence development or registry like in the Netherlands or in France, we do a lot of coverage with evidence development, but do a sort of federated approach in Europe, so we can continue the assessment of our devices, and it's not country per country. And I think that would really make sense for medical devices. So if we can go to the next slide, and it can be my conclusion, it's what do I think about the new regulation in Europe? I think the restriction which is taken today to focus on high-risk medical device innovative is very interesting, and it's where we need to focus for the time being. Don't widen the net too early. I think that today's guidelines in terms of methodology are not adapted to medical devices. That's why I put this drawing here. I think they need to be contextualized to the medical device we want to assess. And the other things, when I say I, it's Medtronic, and I hope some of my other health technology developer colleagues, obviously. Now, today, the objective is to do the joint clinical assessment as early as possible. And we may not have all the data that we need to have to assess the device. So we may have a GCA done, which will be relevant or less relevant, which might say we don't have enough data for the PICOs at stake, and which might then be obsolete, okay, pretty quickly. So one idea could be also to look at the complete clinical evidence development plan that we have, so to look at the ongoing study at the time of the GCA, so that you can also inform the member state of what's going on and what is the plan of the industry on that. And the other consideration or idea we have is really to do a federated coverage with evidence development. And my hope is that the European health data space, with a secondary usage of electronic health records or claims data, might be a solution to do that. It's a hope, I'm not sure, because, you know, the devil is in the details, but that can be a solution going forward. So now you ask for KPI, okay? So I put it in 4 different things. The first is about the Medical Device Implementing Act. So thinking about the timing of assessment, we wanted to propose, maybe we can tell you when to assess the device and not at time of the CE mark, for example. Please include us into the definition of the PICOs, because when we do clinical development plan in medical devices, we work with patients in diabetes for hybrid closed loop, for example, or we work with surgeons. So we have expertise that are worth sharing with HTA bodies as well. The second thing is, the dialogue. I think it's very important. You talk about silos. How can we break the silos if we are not involved into this type of discussion and approaches at the beginning? The second thing is more the relevance of a joint clinical assessment, and there I try to quantify because it's KPI, so the number of GAC requested and evolution over time. Do we trust this new regulation to submit for GSC? I'm not sure yet. You know, I'm looking for the other. Maybe one will be more brave than we are at Medtronic to go through a GSC. But right now, do we trust the system? We are not that sure. The second thing is the number of joint clinical assessment that will be recognized, that will recognize appropriate clinical evidence given the medical device context. Yeah, you look at me. Okay, meaning that if the result is the LCT is not double-blind for this, so it's not appropriate, then it's not very useful. It's more, is the clinical development plan and what we know today adapted to the uncertainty we can accept on this medical device today to ensure, to give access to patient to this device. And the other thing is, it's more for us as industry, the number of PICOs, we don't want too many, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult. The number of indirect comparison, because if we have too many PICO, we'll have to do indirect comparison, and we don't have hundreds of data scientists at Medtronic, although it's a big company, so that's also a burden for us. The number of excluded study, because what we did is not aligned with the PICO of the GCA, so we did study, but it's not the expectation, so that's also something. And also the impact of a risk of bias tool, because I have an example in mind. We, on renal denervation, we did a meta-analysis on 25 RCT, and all of them go through different risk of bias analysis. For example, RCT versus sham procedures were assessed as having a higher risk of bias than open label trial. And it has been published, and it was a bit surprising. So I think it's because this risk of bias are not looking at the context, again, of medical devices. So it has to be carefully assessed as well. Then what is the usefulness of joint clinical assessment in countries? Do we have a big delay between the GCA and the HTA? In France, for example, we submit the dossier for reimbursement once we are ready. So we may wait 2-3 years after the MDR, for example. So what is the timelines? Are we delayed because of the GCA? Because the GCA taking too long, for example. And also the proportion of local HTAs that have leveraged the GCA fully. So more than just cited it, we acknowledge it, but we are redoing another assessment on new data, for example. And last but not least, because having a positive HTA is one thing, but having coverage funding and adequate and real patient access is very important. What is the time to values, the time between the joint clinical assessment, device being reimbursed, and the device being reimbursed in some key European markets that we can define, and not only the big five. We can also look in other Central European markets, because I think we need to be more open into this type of approaches to ensure, again, equity in the approach in Europe. And then another thing which is important, and this I don't have the answer, is what will be the impact of the joint clinical assessment on the healthcare provider adoption, who usually is looking at the benefit risk on an individual patient level, and not really except for scientific doctors, but more on an individual patient level. And if you look at a C-suite of a hospital, they who wants to open or to buy an innovation, they will be much more looking at the budget impact it has on their revenue than at a GCA or at an HTA. So that's what I wanted to share with you.